This is going to be the second page for PS4. Again, we're talking about the periodic table, so I'm just going to put this little heading up at the top. And this page is going to talk about how the periodic table is arranged. So if I draw a rough sketch of the periodic table, well, remember that there's several parts. We need to identify right here the zigzag line. That's where the metalloids live. So I'm going to mark this with metalloids. Okay. Everything to the right of the zigzag line are considered nonmetals. Everything to the left of the zigzag line are going to be considered metals. Remember that the columns or rows are called groups or families. I'm sorry if I said columns or rows. The columns are groups or families, and the rows, there's 7 of them, these are called periods. Okay, just a reminder down here, groups or families, these columns are named by the top elements in the column. Elements in a group have similar properties. In a group or family, have similar properties and the same number of valence electrons. If you remember, we find the valence electrons by what column they're in. So everything in this column has 1 valence electron. This column has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, until you get all the way to the noble gases, which have 8 valence electrons. We skip the transition metals. So now this should take up the first half of the page. So now we're going to look at the second half of the page. I'm going to clear the screen. And we're going to talk about bonds. So this is the second half of the same page. And we're going to remember that bonds are used because elements form bonds to become chemically stable. Remember, when you've got bonding going on, an element, it wants in its outermost shell 8 or 0 valence electrons. And so it's striving to try, if it's close to 8, it's going to try and find 8. If it's close to 0, it's going to be eager to give up 1. We have 2 types of bonds. We have ionic bonds. And in an ionic bond, electrons are transferred creating positive and negative ions. Because remember, if you take on an electron, you become negative, and if you give away an electron, you become positive. And we know that these are formed. If you look on the periodic table, I'm going to draw another little rough sketch right here. Okay, and these are usually made when you combine metals with nonmetals. Okay, so when you combine a metal with a nonmetal, you're going to get an ionic bond. And when you combine metals with metals, okay, so these usually occur when metals transfer electrons to nonmetals. That's transfer. To nonmetals. Or when metals transfer electrons to metals. And to save space, I'm just going to put an E- for electrons. So then let's look at covalent bonds. Because the second type of bond is a covalent bond. Okay, and these are when electrons are shared. That's where you get the co from, because they're shared. So if we draw a little sketch of the periodic table, okay, you've got these usually form when you combine nonmetals with nonmetals. So we're going to write this down here. Usually, I'm going to finish this in green, occur when nonmetals share electrons with nonmetals. And that's all for that page on PS4.